we're in a larger space here because we entered the Broadway years. The subtitle is Broadway and Fame. So this did overlap his Broadway years with his Provincetown Players years, but um, his first play on Broadway was a pretty big success, um, Beyond the Horizon, and we have a playbill from that, a program from that, from the original production of that. Um, we also have from The Emperor Jones, which followed the same year. Harley was just talking about that one. We have an inscribed book from Paul Robeson, and Paul was the second lead role in The Emperor Jones. The first one popularized the role, but he he was on, Charles Gilpin was his name. He became a star in the role, and it was really a groundbreaking role because he was an African American actor playing an African American role in a lead role, and again for the time, this was something that was either done in blackface or was just not even written. So Charles Gilpin really made the role popular, and then Paul Robeson, who was the initial choice for the role, but turned it down at first, became the replacement, and then he really ran with it. He did a 1933 movie of it, and you may recognize the name Paul Robeson. He became a very popular actor in the Harlem Renaissance, as well as a singer, and many other talents as well. A social activist for sure, and they had I think, a lifelong friendship following that. Following The Emperor Jones, Anna Christie was also I should mention that Beyond the Horizon won his first Pulitzer. Anna Christie came along in a year later, and he won his second Pulitzer right away with that one. However, critics took issue with Anna Christie because they thought he was kind of selling out, giving it a happy ending, wasn't really, in the O'Neill's usual way of ending a play. And so we have a couple of interesting documents from that, including a type letter from O'Neill to the critic Ernest Boyd explaining why he ended Anna Christie the way that he did. And then we have a original draft, a typescript draft with holograph corrections by O'Neill, which he titled "Happy Ending" and then question mark in parentheses. And this was an essay or a letter that he wrote to the New York Times, which then they did publish. So he's publicly explaining to people why he ended it the way he did. And again, he won a Pulitzer for it, so I kind of feel like he didn't need to explain it too much, but those are really great documents there. And then following Anna Christie came The Hairy Ape, which was another hit, another a kind of experimental, subjective, expressionist play. This one kind of dealing with the class struggle, and we have director's notes from the first. The first director wrote, and he's, I believe, sending them to when they did a revival of the play for the next director to kind of tell him, okay, this is what we did, this is how we did it. So again, a really important document giving you insight in how they staged the play then. So those are kind of his breakthrough on Broadway. And then as he is kind of leaving the Provincetown Players behind, he's getting more, I call them expressionistic epics. They are longer. They include casts of sometimes hundreds. So they're plays that maybe aren't as well known, aren't as staged beyond this time period. But we have a number of scripts, corrected scripts from these, which you'll see here, including The Fountain, which was about Ponce de Leon. This was not a big success for him. Lazarus Laughed. This was one which is about the Lazarus of the Bible who comes back from the dead, and then he explains how the afterlife is just God laughing. And so he laughs throughout the play, no matter how much torment is beset upon him. He just ends up laughing the whole rest of the play. But there's a chorus of hundreds in the play. And Marco Millions is a kind of a social satire of Marco Polo's trip to China, and a lot of commentary about capitalism and America, especially. This was a big hit for O'Neill, as was Strange Interlude, which, as Harley mentioned, was banned in Boston because of the sexual content. But we have what they called the Quincy script. I think it was Quincy, Massachusetts, right near Boston. So they got around the Boston ban by just doing it in Quincy. And we have the script here of that, showing how they made some revisions. But this won his third Pulitzer. Strange Interlude did, and so it was another big hit for him. And then we have a script from Dynamo and a photograph as well, Van Dyne photograph. We have from that production. That was not a big hit. O'Neill was over in Europe with his. He was eloping with Carlotta, which we'll talk about in a minute. So he was not involved in the production, and critics hated it, and he did too. But he ended up revising it after it was performed, and so it ended up being a play that was never actually performed in the published version that he eventually published. We want to point out these window cards. These are the ones that are hanging here: Strange Interlude, Marco Millions, Days Without End. These are from the Theater Guild archive, as well as other great visuals here that you see. And I think those came in a big acquisition. Harley, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so one of the dealers that called me in the middle of the night was a guy named Glenn Horwitz. And he had a fancy, he sold books, manuscripts, he sold art on the Upper East Side. At one point in time, it was the Upper East Side, and then he moved to the Hamptons. And he thought a lot of himself, but he got a lot of good stuff. And when the Theater Guild, which I said did a lot of O'Neill's plays and a lot of other American playwrights, it became defunct sometime in the 80s or whenever that was. It was sort of dwindling well before then. Somehow he got his hands on all of their archives, and he sold me, or offered me, the O'Neill part of that. What he had was huge. It must have been much more than just the O'Neill part. But there were not only these window cards, there were just anything about a production. There were contracts with the lighting contract and the set contract and the music contract, and you know, every little detail of these productions were in these files and in these archives, and that's what that's what I ended up purchasing from him. And you know, it was just, you know, a wonderful collection, because it, you know, you could get down to the nitty gritty of all these productions. There were, I don't think I have how many items, but there were also scripts. There were some wonderful scripts that Richard Madden or different people would have, and O'Neill would then scribble notes in it and make corrections in it in his hand. So that was also part of it. So that was the other big purchase I made that added a lot of importance to the collection. One interesting thing is that in last year, in 2022, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, that name might sound familiar because he was involved in one of the Trump cases, he charged Glenn Horwitz with knowingly selling stolen manuscripts. He sold Don Henley's notes, including the words to Hotel California. So he was charged and I think convicted. I
think the trial is still to come.
Is it still to come?
Yes,
all right, but I bet he gets convicted.
Yeah.
And knowing Glenn, he did it. So as far as the stuff I bought from him, was that stolen? I don't know, but it's not my problem anymore.
Now it's our problem. Yeah. Hopefully, no one will want it back or need it back. So a couple other things in these cases. As we mentioned, O'Neill was married to Agnes Bolton, and they had 2 children. This is in the early mid-20s. As these plays are coming out, he's really making it big. And we have a inscribed book from O'Neill to Agnes on their 7th wedding anniversary, that their daughter Una, who we'll talk about later, It ended up in her library, and she rebound it with her initials embossed on it. So that's a really great artifact there. And one other really special manuscript, I think, in this collection is this one here. We call it the Untitled Autobiographical Manuscript. And Harley is going to talk a little bit more about the significance of this one.
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. So I mainly collected O'Neill, but I got interested in other American playwrights, and I saw advertised once a first edition of Our Town by Thornton Wilder, and along with it was inscribed by Wilder to a woman named Barbara Burton, who was a member of the cast. There's like a chorus in it, or people of the town, or whatever. And she was one of these people, and there was also a letter from Barbara Burton dated 1984, sort of detailing the provenance and saying how Thornton Wilder had given her this book and written out some other things and whatever. So I got this and wasn't really thinking much of it until I got it, and I thought, wait a minute, I know who Barbara Burton is. Barbara Burton was the daughter of Agnes Bolton, O'Neill's second wife by a first marriage, and she happened to appear in the initial Broadway production of Our Town. And what was interesting about that to me was that here's a letter, a current letter, 1984. It meant she was still alive, and she spent summers with her mother, meaning she spent summers with O'Neill. And I thought if I could correspond with her, maybe I could find out some, interesting things about O'Neill. So I sent a letter to the dealer that I bought it from, and I said, hey, could you get this to Barbara Burton? And a little while after that, I got back a letter from a man named Louis Schaefer. Louis Schaefer was one of the major O'Neill biographers, and he wrote me that he actually had sort of brokered the deal for these materials for Barbara Burton, and he would pass on this letter to her, and he did, and I got a nice little short letter back. As an aside, somewhere down the line, I purchased the archives of Schaefer's letters with a lot of people, including back and forth between Barbara Burton, and I'm mentioned in that because he says just send this guy back a little short thing, because one day he's a collector and his collection's going to be in some archive somewhere, and you don't want to write too much, and I guess he was right. So, but in any event, I wrote back and forth with Schaefer a little bit and sent him a printout of my collection, and then got a letter from him saying, now that I know the scope of your collection, I'd like to offer you something. Again, he needed money. And he offered me this document here, and what this is, it's sort of handwritten in pencil, and it's minuscule. You need a magnifying glass to see it, and it's written out by O'Neill, and it details his early history, his family history, his mother's morphine addiction, and just on and on. And Schaefer actually reproduces this in his book. I think we've got the biography down the line. He reproduces this, and his theory was that this was sort of the precursor to him writing his great play, Long Day's Journey into Night. And so I purchased that from Schaefer. But then I started doing some research on my own, and without going into that research, by the way, all of my research is on the website. So when I have something on the website, I put it all on there so that, if you want to know my research, go to the website for this document, and you can see that. But what I came to the conclusion was that it had nothing to do with Long Day's Journey into Night. It was another play which O'Neill never published, called The Sea Mother's Son, and he had a work diary and different scenarios written out, and it became obvious to me that that's what this was all about. So I wrote Schaefer a letter and saying, hey, with all due respect, I know you think this is Long Day's Journey, but I think it's The Sea Mother's Son, and this is why. And I got back a postcard, and all it said on it, you may be right. So I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, that's great.